Hi, I'm Carla Gericke.
And I'm Louis Calitz, we've just been introduced, by the way. But
There's a slide. This is going to be
we've been
great.
married for 30 years, moved to America together, and landed in Silicon Valley, where I was a software engineer.
And I was in House Counsel, as we just heard. So we sort of rode the dot-com bubble and bust, and then decided we were just going to put all our stuff in storage, start packing around the world. The original plan was we were just going to go for a year on a $15 a day budget. We ended up going for like 3 years, and then we came back to the States, did a post-9/11 stint in New York City, and then we together moved to the Free State in 2008. So we all know South Africa's been in the news a lot. Obviously, Elon, yay. But also Trump, and Trump had said recently he was willing to give farmers in South Africa green cards, and then he was refugee status, and then he said some other things. And honestly, it just sounded like Trump talking a lot, but what happened was a lot of our friends reached out to us and they were like, hey, is this serious? And that gave us a little bit of a different flavor because in the past, most people who wanted to leave South Africa had left. So it kind of gave it a new urgency, I suppose. So we're like, what's going on? So we're going to try and figure that out.
Yeah, so what happened in South Africa was not inevitable, and what's happening now in America is not irreversible. So we're going to look at the history of South Africa and why it happened the way it did and what we can learn from it. So first, a sad story is we have personal experience with the violence in South Africa. A couple of years ago, a very good friend of mine that I went to school with was a farmer in the Eastern Cape, and he was murdered on the farm. They lived in a very safe, tightly knit farming community. He had a great relationship with his black workers. But despite that, two strangers walked off onto the farm and shot him while he was shielding his wife and his youngest son.
For a
and it was all for a cell phone. It was all they walked away with. But what is interesting, or in addition, what is sad is that a lot of our friends in South Africa refuse to be armed, despite we talked to them about being armed and protecting themselves, and none of them are. And he was one of those. I've talked to him personally about arming him and his wife and his children, given that they live on a farm, and everyone knows the farms are dangerous.
So that was very tragic, and it really brought it home for us. The last time we were in South Africa was in 2019, and that was round about the time that the rolling blackouts, or what the government calls load shedding, started, right? So the crisis in South Africa is now so real that the lights just randomly go out. It is very hard to run a business. Lots of our family have left, or they've gone to places like Namibia. But I thought it was interesting when we got there last time, it almost felt like, how on trees you have the rings of trees and it tells you the age of a tree. You can actually see the crime rate rise in the walls around people's properties in South Africa. So literally, you will look at a neighborhood and there will be a 5-6 foot original brick wall that now has 2 feet of brick on top of that now has broken glass on top of that, and that now has razor wire on top of that. So it is a very visual representation of what is actually happening there. Yep.
So the lessons to learn, and we know this, but our experience and our friends' experience does underscore it, is that self-defense is a natural right, and don't give up your weapons and your ability to defend yourself and your family. Government can't protect you. When things go down, it's you and the situation and the people you have to protect. It's unlikely that the government's going to be in a position to help you. And just looking at the way people think about owning guns there and self-defense, you have to face up to reality. There are bad things that happen in this world, and you have to be prepared for them. There's no sense in imagining that we live in a paradise. We don't. There's violence out there, and we need to protect ourselves.
So there's an old joke in South Africa that basically goes, when God was creating the world, he created this special place called South Africa, and he gave us the most beautiful beaches, Table Mountain, giraffes, come on, giraffes, lions, cheetahs, leopards, just, forests, beautiful water. It's just this beautiful place. And Gabriel says to God, yo, aren't you laying this on a bit thick? Why are you giving them all these blessings? And God says, oh, just wait, Gabriel. Wait till you see what politics I give them. So people think about South Africa in terms of black and white, but that is not really the true story. It is a very gray story. People forget, yes, it's black and white, but also there were the coloreds, which is not a derogatory term. It was a mixed race population of over 1 million, and they spoke Afrikaans. They were very culturally aligned with the Afrikaners. There are tribes in South Africa that absolutely hate each other. The Zulus and the Xhosas do not like each other. There are 13 official languages in the country. So imagine when you're doing a court case and you have to provide a translator for that case. So South Africa is actually much more complex than most of us fully grasp or understand.
So apartheid was this grand socialist scheme that the white rulers of South Africa came up with in order to manage all of this complexity. And like any socialist scheme, it goes wrong. It was intended, like any socialist scheme, like communism had admirable goals. The goals are not the problem. So the goals here were protection of minorities in a country that has a lot of minority groups, but also manage the gap between a modern Western culture and essentially an Iron Age culture for a large part. But the government, the focus was groups of people and not individuals. So what happened was groups of people got special rights while individual rights went by the wayside. And today, again, today the ANC government is exactly the same. They just discriminate against different people. It's the white people now that get screwed over, and again, with disastrous results.
So the lesson, of course, there is to protect individual rights, because when you protect individual rights, which we all as libertarians understand, the rest will take care of itself.
So democracy, part of the problem in South Africa, and actually a big driver for where they are at right now, is Western institutions, flawed Western institutions, that were instituted in a place that they didn't make sense at all, and made less sense than they do in the West. And those are things like socialism, nation states, democracy. It's actually not surprising that the country kind of fell apart after the handover of power, because these institutions kind of work in the West. Long term they don't, but they kind of work in the West because there's a culture of pushing back against the state or dealing with the state in a certain way that we can get by, especially in the early stages of democracy. But eventually, democracy destroys everything. It's all the great democracies are died as tyrannies and as failures. Greece, Rome, all of them became empires. The US is an empire right now.
So, when democracy came to South Africa, someone like me, who had grown up under apartheid, we were actually very excited, right? Like, it was like the Rainbow Nation cometh. It's one man, one vote. When Louis and I went to vote, we actually went to, like, Arcadia, our neighborhood, and Jesse Jackson from America was, like, there doing his CNN stuff. So there was this like real sense of optimism. And, we even personally, we were probably one of like, I don't know, 10 white people who went to Nelson Mandela's inauguration at the Union Buildings. It was a public thing, and there were tens of thousands of people who went to celebrate. And, everyone was like, you want to go to that? And I was like, yes, we're part of history. Of course I want to go to that. I want to go see what's going on. But this sort of drive and this optimism really did ignore a lot of realities, i.e. the splits between the tribes, it was a story we told ourselves that wasn't really valid, because what we know about democracy ultimately is democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Well, no. Okay. So, the warnings are that democracy means majority rule, right? So we know democracy has been a failure, and to the point Louis made earlier, it fails because mob rule inevitably does lead to tyranny and empire. So something people don't often talk about is that the apartheid regime also abused property rights. So they actually did expropriate white farms for homelands that the apartheid regime wanted to build. So they were taking farms at one stage to try and build these other homelands where they were then going to move large swaths of population, much like actually the tribal lands in the Native American culture here in America. And they also did things like forced resettlement. So there was this district known as District 6 in Cape Town. This was a mixed race. Honestly, it was like the coolest part of South Africa were the mixed places. It's where you had jazz, you would have mosques, you would have churches, you would have synagogues. It was where people truly, I think, interacted on a human level. And what the apartheid regime did is they decided to forcibly relocate 60,000 people. It was a colored neighborhood, so again, culturally aligned with the Afrikaners. They went in and they razed that neighborhood, and to this day, there is a District 6 museum and nothing has been rebuilt. It is just a blight on, I guess, on the soul of the country.
And today, expropriation is on the table again. The ANC, there was a court case in South Africa recently where the court decided that white farms can be expropriated at zero cost. Now, the South
Null compensation.
Null compensation. The South African Constitution, exactly to prevent things like this from happening, actually contains a clause that says that expropriation will not happen without compensation. All the court did was said that, well, zero is a number.
For real.
This is real. This is not a joke. And the reason they're doing this is not because it's not to right past wrongs. Most of the land were bought or traded from black people in cases that it was used. It's a political ploy. It's there to stoke race enmity because the ANC hasn't achieved anything. Even the black people know that they failed. So this is just a ploy to keep power, essentially. So they're prepared to destroy the country, destroy the farming industry, and basically let South Africa become Zimbabwe again. And that's a disaster.
Zimbabwe did not work out well. Yeah. Okay.
So the lessons would be without property, there's no prosperity. And in America, we have to stop the incremental socialism. It goes on all the time, and we don't even see it. And then fight for property rights on the local level, where your voice actually matters and where you can do something.
Oh, yes, I did. I think you're...
in South Africa, and I guess everywhere else, the problem is not race per se, but the gap in cultures between modern Western culture and an African culture. And But the problem so the government decided to use race as this rigid rule to separate people and try to make things work. The problem, if you have a rule like that, in practice, what happens in South Africa is they alienated people that were allies and that could have been allies, and those are the colored people that Carla mentioned, that had a very similar culture, a large group of Indians from India. They were all separated out, but also the westernized black people. So there were black people that were enthusiastically grabbing onto Western culture.
I mean,
became
Nelson
entrepreneurs.
Mandela, right?
Nelson Mandela was a lawyer, went to university, was a lawyer. Those people would have been allies had they not been separated by race. Yeah, I think that.
So I mean, from our perspective, let me just say one thing. There is literally nothing duller than hanging out with a bunch of racists. Like, we grew up where, like, that was the thing, right? Like, everyone would just talk about it all the time, and I've never been able to figure out, is it an inferiority complex manifesting as a superiority complex, or is it the other way around? But it really is not the way to try and direct your life. So the AI, just side note, wouldn't actually let me make this slide, so I had to go in and manually do it. But you know, we also have to address this sort of mental gymnastics that is developing here in America with regard to how people are looking at race, and are they doing it in fair ways. So here are a couple of examples. The New York Times came out with an op-ed or an article that said, kill the boer, boer meaning farmer in South Africa, the Afrikaans word for farmer. So there'd be stadiums full of people, 60,000 people chanting, kill the boer. And the New York Times was like, that's totally cool, because they don't really mean it. It's just a historic thing that they're saying, right? But while also, during the same time, making the argument that if you said all lives matter in America, that was racist. And so it's like, how are we holding these sort of cognitive dissonances in our brain? And then very recently, I saw a meme, and I was literally like, that cannot possibly be true. And what it said was that the AP, the Associated Press, the style guide, has now been changed to capitalize Black as a race because they have a shared culture, and white as a race would no longer be capitalized, this is for real, because it might empower white supremacists with a small w. And I was like, how did we get here? How did we get to this point of this double think and these just topsy-turvy ways that we are approaching these things? So the lessons are that reverse racism, which is not a real thing, there is only racism, is also bad, right? So we shouldn't be going down this path where we're playing a game of collectivists, because that is what racism is. There should be no special classes for anyone, because what? The smallest minority is you. And behavior is culture, not race. So the ANC, which is the African National Congress, is like the new boss, just as bad as the old boss, right? So there was centralization under the nationalists, under the apartheid regime of the energy sector, the schooling sector, all of that, as we see that concentrated power here in America too. So what the ANC did is they just kind of came in and they co-opted that, and now we have more and more centralization, which ultimately leads to things like load shedding and blackouts because you can't run the power grid anymore. So really the solution there is to break everything into smaller parts. The answer is not more power in DC. The answer is more states' rights, more New Hampshire, more free states.
So as I mentioned, one of the problems in South Africa was the having a nation state that wasn't appropriate to the country or the society. So having a nationalist state and combining all these societies together into one made the problem of teaching people how to deal with democracy and Western institutions made it the problem of the white people. So the white people came, in a sense, because they knew how it worked, became, in a sense, stewards of the black people in the society. And that's something that I don't think anyone sort of thought about when they created apartheid. And it's a heavy responsibility. Now you're suddenly responsible for all these people and making sure violence doesn't break out. And then also like shepherding them towards sort of understanding of what modern society is like. It didn't need to be like this. So basically, prior to the Boer War, there were two Afrikaner republics, the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. And the British conquered them and combined them into a unitary state, South Africa, with two other colonies, Natal and the Cape, which were under British rule. So the Brits combined it, and at the time South Africa became independent, they just continued with this unitary state. What could have happened was that the Afrikaners could have seceded and decided not to go with the unitary state. They were republics a bare 40 years before then. They could just have said, no, thank you, we'll go back to what we had before. And then instead of having to manage this whole thing, they could just be like, we're going to do our own thing and have the African tribes do their own thing and develop at their own pace.
1 minute. Talk faster.
Okay. And today, there's something very like that in Orania, in South Africa now. That's a private society that initially just allowed white Afrikaners to live there. But since then, they changed their access to anyone that accepts or that lives the Afrikaner culture, so religion, language, etc. So that now black and brown people living there.
So the lessons, because we got to go quickly now, is that decentralization is rational, not radical. Don't try and control the things you cannot control. Federalism is a mistake, and free states is the answer.
So I think we just have to skip over this one, right?
So the long and the short of it is no one is coming to save you. You are responsible for yourself. Let's write the best futures together that we can. Thank you.